Hi, I'm Brent Haseker with the Worship Blender, and this is a new video series that I'm doing in order to help people who are new to the bass instrument to be able to get up and running as quickly as possible with their worship team. And I'm really excited about this video series because I love to be able to see people to be able to join a worship team and be able to serve in that capacity and to watch them grow. And so really hope that this video series will help you out if you're in that situation. This first video that I'm going to do is going to be on the bass instrument itself. I'm not going to give you any instruction on how to play it. I'm basically going to give you an overview of the bass itself and what everything on the bass is, and also how to pick out a bass if you've never, if you don't own one, how to pick out your first bass with some good words of wisdom in order to find an entry-level instrument for you. So if you already have a bass guitar or you already have a good overview understanding of the bass instrument, you might not need this first video. You can then skip ahead to the second. But if you're really new to the instrument, this will be a good video for you to at least give you the basics, no pun intended there, and also to help you to understand all the buzzwords that are associated with the instrument. All right, so if we're going to play the bass guitar, we need to at least understand our instrument that we are playing, right? So let me give you an overview of all the parts of the bass itself. So this, of course, is a bass guitar. And when you hear the word, the body of the instrument, obviously this section here is going to be the body of the instrument. You also hear the term, the neck of the instrument. Well, that would be this part here, the actual neck. And then on top of the neck, you have the fretboard. Most people refer to the fretboard and the neck all as the same thing, but really the neck is this part of the actual wood that the fretboard sits on. And then when you go, if this is the neck, then obviously if we go up here, this is going to be the head of the bass. So you've got the body, the neck, and the head. And doesn't have any arms or legs, so we don't have to worry about that. And then on the head, we've got the tuners, obviously for tuning the strings. And then down here on this end of the bass, we've got the bridge. And then on the bridge in most basses, you'll also have what are called saddles. These are what the strings sit on, and these saddles are adjustable, and I'll tell you a little bit about that a little bit later. You also have the pick guard. Not all basses have a pick guard, but most of them do. You also have pickups. You can kind of think of these as the microphones for the strings. They pick up the sound of the strings vibrating and send that off to your amplifier. And then you've got the controls right here. And you've also got strap pegs on each end in order, of course, to hang the bass on a strap. You've got frets. These are frets here. You've also got fretless basses that don't have frets, but we'll get into that later as well. Then you've also got some other important things that you might not know about, which is the truss rod, which on this bass is accessible from right here. You kind of see that little black spot there on the head of the bass right here. And on some basses, you'll also have access to it right here. And what that truss rod does is it runs down the neck, and you can adjust that truss rod to pull the neck back and forth to straighten it back up, because it's wood and necks will kind of warp and bend over time, and so that truss rod can help to correct that bending of the wood. And then up here you've also got what's called the nut, and that's just where the strings, the last things the strings contact here before they go off here to the tuners. So that's basically it right there. All right, so let's start off with the precision bass. This is actually considered to be the first electric bass that was brought to market back in the early 50s. And so this bass has been around a long time, and it's kind of one of the standard basses out there, and you really can't go wrong with it. As the precision bass, it's also referred to as the P bass, and it's very distinctive visually in that this sweeping pick guard that it has here on the end here, this kind of swooping thing here, that's definitely a good way to visually recognize it when you see one. Also, it has the precision pickups here, which kind of look like this little zigzag pattern right here. That's actually a precision pickup. And you also see these pickups on other basses, but it comes from this particular bass. That's where it derives from. So this bass is extremely popular still. It's one of the most commonly used basses that you'll see regardless of musical style. It's used in all styles of music, but yeah, a lot of people use it in worship music, so it's definitely a good bass to know. All right, so this is the next bass that I want to show you. This is the Fender Jazz bass, and it's incredibly popular bass, just like the Precision, and it's been around since 1960. And it is very well used in all styles of worship music as well as any other style of music out there. You'll see this bass everywhere. It's very identifiable by its silver control plate right here, which is separate from the rest of the pick guard. And then it also has these jazz bass pickups in it. These are basically single coil pickups that, if I'm understanding correctly, first showed up in the jazz bass model. And so anytime you see a pickup that looks like this, it's derived from the jazz bass, and that's why you'll see these types of pickups referred to as J-bass pickups or jazz bass pickups, which brings me to the point that the jazz bass is also referred to as a J-bass, just as a Precision bass is referred to as a P-bass. And so you definitely can't go wrong. This is actually my main bass that I play. I highly recommend it, but obviously you're going to want to use the bass that works best for you. But jazz bass is definitely a good bass to know and be familiar with. All right, so I also wanted to show you this bass, which is a short scale bass. Now there's lots of different short scale basses. This just happens to be one model of a short scale bass. But short scale basses have been around for a long time, but they're really becoming, I think, a lot more popular now than they were a few years back. So you're seeing these a lot more often. And what makes a short scale bass is the distance from the bridge to the nut. And in this case, it's 30 inches, and 30 inches is considered a short scale bass. Now, other basses, the other two basses that I just showed you, like for example, this jazz bass, the length from the bridge to the nut is 34 inches. So that would be a standard scale bass. So the short scale is a bit shorter, obviously, than a regular scale bass. And that's where it gets its name from. And so it's important to know about short scale basses, because if you're searching online or you're trying to find a bass that'll work for you, you might see the term short scale and not know what that means. And a lot of people like short scales and a lot of people don't. And it depends on your preference. And so usually you won't know until you actually play one. But a short scale, since it's shorter, usually people with smaller fingers tend to like them because they don't have to stretch as much to reach all the frets that they're trying to play. But in my opinion, even though I have longer fingers, I think, than most people, but I can play either a short scale bass or a regular scale bass without a problem. And I think they're cool basses, so definitely consider one of these as well as a potential first bass for you. All right, so this is the next bass that I wanted to show you, and it is a fretless bass. I know I mentioned earlier that a bass might not have frets, and that would be the case here. It does have fret lines, so you can still see where the frets would be. And the purpose of a fretless bass, it's a different sounding instrument. You can get more of an acoustic bass kind of sound with it. You can also slide your notes. You can be more expressive with the instrument. But a lot of people consider it to be harder to play. My opinion is it's not necessarily, I don't think, harder to play. I think it's harder to play well, but you can get started on it pretty easily, especially if you have fret lines. You just have to use your ear to be able to hear, because if you're not playing in the exact spot where you need to be playing, then you'll either be sharp or flat because you don't have the fret to cut off the notes. So, and also over time, say if you're playing in an environment where the weather's changing, or you go from a hot room and then you move into a cold room and you have changes in temperature and humidity, then the instrument will change, the wood might bend a little, the strings might tighten up or loosen up based on those different conditions. And so where you actually place your fingers on the neck might slightly change a little bit over time. So those are things you need to know about a fretless bass. A little bit, I would say it is more of a challenge, more that you got to think about. But it's really not as hard as a lot of people say it is. But it is a little bit more of a challenge to play than your standard fretted bass. But again, it gives you a lot of expressive control that you really don't have with a fretted bass. And it can be a lot of fun to play too, because when you do those slides without any frets, woo, yeah, it's really fun, and people really like the sound of it. So definitely a cool instrument to be familiar with. All right, and also, while I've got the fretless out, I also wanted to mention that this is another common bass that you will see. It's a Music Man Stingray, and it is a popular bass. It's in this particular case, this is the 5-string version. The 4-string has a little bit of a different pickguard shape in that it doesn't swoop down like this, where the 5-string does, but it's very distinguished looking because of that pickguard and how it doesn't follow the outline of the lower horn of the instrument. It just kind of cuts off there, and it also has these big humbucking pickups in it. Makes it very distinguished looking, and so yeah, you'll see this bass a lot. It's not as popular as the Fender Jazz and the Fender Precision, but it's definitely one of the more popular basses that is out there. All right, now for something a little bit different. This bass actually fills a couple different types of basses that I can tell you about. First, it's a headless bass, and that the tuners are actually down here. And the point of a headless bass, a lot of people think, oh, that's really weird looking, but there's a really cool reason for having a headless bass. Number one, since it cuts off the head of the bass, all of that weight that would be up here is now gone. It's just a little bit of weight added here for the tuners. And that means you don't have this heavier head pulling down on the end of the instrument, which is causing something that's called neck dive, and also you'll feel it more on your shoulder. So this actually becomes a very comfortable bass to play when you don't have a head on it. Also, this bass is very ergonomically designed. It's got this long horn here where it's got the strap pegs placed. It actually, when you hold the bass, it sits at a 45-degree angle, which is more comfortable for your left hand and also for your right hand as well. Also, this bass is what's called a fanned fret bass. You can kind of see how the frets aren't actually parallel. They actually change over the course of the neck. They're more this way here, more straight in the middle, and then definitely angled here, getting close to the nut. And the reason for that is, well, there's a lot of reasons, and kind of hard to explain in this quick video here for you, but it does help out. I guess you can think of it this way. If you were to open up the lid on a grand piano, if you saw the strings that were inside for the higher pitched notes, they would be shorter than the the strings for the lower end notes. And so kind of the same concept here, the lower pitched strings are longer, and then the higher pitched strings are shorter. That's what the fan fret does. And so that helps out with intonation and playability. A lot of people find it to be a more comfortable bass. Also, it's just tone-wise, since it's taking advantage of the different scale lengths for each string. And in this particular case, this bass from here to here is 32 inches, whereas on the highest pitched string from here to here is 30. So it changes from a 32 inch to a 30 inch scale over time. So this is considered a medium to short scale bass for that reason of the fan frets. And while I have this bass out, I also make a reference to something else too, in that some basses are active basses and some basses are passive basses. And this bass does both. It's an active and a passive depending on which direction this switch right here is. When it's up, it's passive. When it's down, it takes advantage of the active circuitry. And what that does basically is it just gives it a little bit more output. And also it has EQ. In this particular case, it has a low, a mid, and a high EQ band, and the mid is sweepable, just means that you can pick what frequency that you want to boost or cut. And so it just gives you some controls right here on the instrument so that you don't have to turn to your amp to make those adjustments or to a EQ preamp on your pedal board. You can just make the adjustments from right here. A good example of a passive bass, the Fender Jazz as well as the Fender Precision that I showed you earlier are both good examples of passive basses where although there are active versions of those basses as well, but most of these basses that you see will be passive. Now, one thing to keep in mind with a active bass is that you need to have batteries. So in this case, there's a battery compartment right here where I access the 9-volt battery. And so if you're going to have an active bass, just be aware that you're going to have a battery for it. Otherwise, you might, it's got to be a fresh battery because otherwise you might be playing and your bass might kind of poop out on you. You don't want that to happen. I've had it happen. Yes, it does happen. What's nice though about this bass, since it also has a passive mode, if the battery ever were to give out on me, I could just pop it into passive mode and keep playing. And to be honest, I kind of like passive mode better. I prefer really passive basses more, and especially because I have a good preamp pedal where I can adjust it how I want it. And so I just run it like this bass in passive, even though it is an active bass. And yeah, I like passive, and then I don't have to worry about the battery going bad on me or anything else like that. And I can get the control that I want from my preamp, and that can be consistent across all the basses that I play. But passive active basses are two options, and they're both good options. All right, so now I want to talk to you about pickups. Now I know that I already referred to some of the different types of pickups in some of the different basses that I showed you, but I want to go into a little bit more detail now so that you have some more knowledge about the different pickups that are available. And again, going back to the jazz bass and the jazz bass pickups, these are referred to as single coil pickups. And one thing that's important to know about single coil pickups is that they can produce hum. Now, in my experience with this bass, which I've had this bass for over 20 years, I don't notice a lot of hum, especially at home when I'm using it. Now, if I'm using it live on the platform, I can notice some hum if I am using just one pickup, because the way single coil pickups work, when you have two single coil pickups, is that when they're both on, they cancel each other out. They cancel the hum out when they're both on. But if you only have one pickup on, for example, this bass has two volume controls. This volume control for this pickup, this volume control is for this pickup. So if I just had one pickup on and I played it and then I stopped playing, then I would hear a little bit of hum. Because you don't really hear the hum when you're playing it unless the bass is in really bad shape. So the only time I notice any hum is, say we're playing and then we stop and we're not playing anything and somebody's talking, like the preacher's talking or something, then I might hear a little bit of hum, and if that's the case, I'll just turn the volume down. But if I'm using both pickups on, you're not going to hear hum in between the notes being played. And the amount of hum that you're going to hear is going to vary from one bass to the next. Like I said, this one doesn't really hum too bad. But also, you can get hum canceling single coil pickups, but they're typically not something that's available unless you go to a higher end instrument or if you buy it as a third-party aftermarket add-on. So yes, you can upgrade any bass that has J-bass pickups to hum canceling pickups. It's going to be an upgrade that you're going to have to pay for unless you've got a higher end bass that has those pickups already installed. Now, how do the J-bass, jazz bass pickups sound? They're a little bit more of a snappy sound, I think. They have a nice cutting sound to them, especially on the bridge pickup. Has a much edgier tone than the neck pickup. They get their names because this pickup's closer to the neck, this one's closer to the neck, so this one's called the bridge pickup and the neck pickup. And the neck pickup's going to have a kind of a warmer, fuller sound to it, where this one's edgier. But they're good pickups that can really, this along with the tone control, this will roll off the tone, meaning it'll either you have a brighter tone or you'll have a softer tone, is I think the easiest way to explain that. So using these controls and different pickups in different configurations, meaning you might for one song have one pickup up and then maybe for another one you've got both up, and so you're using that to take advantage of the different sound of the pickups in order to get a tone that works for you. Okay, and again we're looking at the precision bass, or also known as the P bass, and these are the precision pickups, and most precision basses don't have this jazz bass pickup added on. This is something that's a newer thing. Well, I say newer even though they've been doing it for 30 whatever plus years, but most precision basses that you see will not have this extra pickup here, but this one does, and that gives it some extra tonal coloration that you can do, just like I just showed you with the jazz bass. You can blend the different pickups together in order to get different sounds. You can do the same thing here, but if you have a precision bass without a jazz bass pickup, then you're just going to have the precision bass pickup, and you're just going to have a knob for volume for the precision bass pickup and a knob for the tone, just like on the jazz bass. And again, on this one, since you have the jazz bass pickup, you've got the jazz bass volume control as well. And also to point out, it is hum canceling because of the design. It's a split coil pickup, and however the mechanics of that work, I can't really explain it to you, but just like when you have two jazz bass pickups on at the same time, that they cancel out the hum. Since you basically have a split coil, you have two different coils, those two coils cancel out the hum. So one of the nice advantages of the precision bass pickup is that you don't get any hum from it. Okay, so back to the Stingray bass, and this bass has what's called the humbucker pickup in it, just like the precision bass, the split coil, and that it cancels out hum. Humbucker cancels out hum. And these pickups, as you can see, they're a lot bigger than the single coil pickups or the split coil pickups of the precision bass, and it has a very big full sound. Humbuckers they're big sounding instruments. Now you don't have, in my opinion, you don't get as much clarity as you would get from a single coil, but it has a lot of meat to it. This is a really full sounding pickup, and yeah, it's powerful. And you can also, on most humbuckers, you see this little switch here. This will allow you to switch different configurations for the pickup, because this will have dual coils in it. That's where it gets the humbucking from, because again, like I said, when you have two jazz bass pickups on at the same time, they cancel each other out. Same thing here, since you have dual coils, those dual coils are canceling each other out, but a lot of these different humbucker basses will allow you to switch the coils, meaning you can turn it into a humbucking pickup, or you can convert it to a single coil pickup. It'll allow you to do different things like that to give you more flexibility in the tone that it produces, but you'll have to check, because each manufacturer is going to be a little different. Each model of bass might be a little different, and what the switches do for the humbucker. All right, so the pickups in this bass are what's called soap bar pickups. They call them soap bar because I guess when they were invented, the inventor said, gee, what do we call these things? I don't know, I guess they look like soap bars. Okay, we'll call them soap bars. So that's what they're called. And what do soap bar pickups sound like? Well, that's hard to say because there's so many different types of soap bar pickups out there, but in this particular case, I would say that these soap bar pickups kind of sound similar to jazz bass pickups, but with an attitude. It's definitely a more aggressive sound, but similar to my jazz bass, and I like the sound a lot. Really great sounding pickup, but it's good to mention that with all basses, if you know to me, I think it's most important to get a bass that feels good in your hands, that you enjoy playing, because any of these pickups and any of the basses that I just showed you, they can all be upgraded. So if you don't like the sound of the pickups, you can change them out. As long as you've got a bass that feels good, that's the most important thing to me. So yeah, if you say, I don't like these pickups, you can go online for, really, like I said, for any bass that I just showed you can go online, you can find tons of different pickups available for all the different types of pickups that are out there from all different manufacturers. There's tons of choices out there, and all of these different pickup manufacturers can make all types of, even the same pickup type, you can get all types of different flavors of sound from the different pickups that are out there. So that's one thing to keep in mind is you can always upgrade a bass at a later time. As long as you find something that you really like that feels good in your hands, hey, stick with it and just upgrade the rest of the bass, especially the pickups if you don't like the sound of it. And that's one way to grow with your instrument and not have to spend more money to get a new bass. You can just spend a little bit of money and upgrade your bass. All right, so now let's talk about strings. Most basses like this one here have 4 strings, and that's 4 strings that, it's been the most common way. I mean, it really wasn't until probably the 70s or 80s when you started seeing 5-string basses showing up on the market. And which one is best for you, you have to decide. Should you start on a 4-string or should you start on a 5? Well, a lot of worship music does take advantage of a 5-string bass. Like all of my other basses other than this one are 5 strings. And how they differ from the 4-string bass is that this 5th string, it adds an extra string on the top, and this 5th string is lower in pitch than the original E string, which would be the lowest pitch string on a 4-string bass. Now you've got a low B. That allows you to hit some lower notes than you could on a 4-string bass, so it gives you a little bit more options there to be able to hit some low notes. And also when you play in some songs that are in some different keys, like E flat and things like that, it allows you to hit a low E flat, which you normally wouldn't be able to hit on a 4-string bass because it doesn't have a low E flat. You would have a low E would be the lowest note that you could play. And so also for me, I find a 5-string bass to be much more comfortable to play because the wider neck actually fits my hands really well, because I mentioned earlier I probably have longer fingers than most people, but I can play a short scale bass fine as long as the short scale bass is a 5-string bass. The short scale bass that I showed you was a 5-string bass. So as long as I have a wider neck for my fingers, I'm much more comfortable. Versus how much space there is between the frets isn't as important to me as the actual width of the neck. And again, everybody's going to be different, so you might have a completely, for you it can be completely different, and you might like something completely different from me. That's why there's so many different models and varieties and options out there. But again, the wider neck is more comfortable for my hands, also allows me to play in some positions that I can't play on a 4-string bass. Like if I was playing in the key of F and I was playing here, that might be a little bit less comfortable to play than if I was playing that same note here. A little bit closer to my body. It's just a little bit more comfortable than having to stretch my arm out that way. But again, either bass is fine. Whichever one is your preference is the way to go. Don't let anybody talk you into saying you've got to have a 5-string bass or you've got to have a 4-string bass. Just find what works best for you, and you can make it work for you in really any musical situation. All right, so now I want to talk about a few basics on maintaining your bass, setting up your bass. Whenever you purchase a bass, if it's a lower cost instrument, chances are that it's going to need some adjustment to it. Usually the more money you pay for a bass, the better it plays when you get it. Now that's not a guarantee at all, but that tends to be the case. Whereas the cheaper bass that you buy, the more setup that you're going to need to do on it, the more adjustments you're going to make in order to make it play well for you. And also there's personal preference. Some people like their bass set up in a particular way that that works for their particular style. And